I was halfway through mowing my lawn when I saw her Karren Whitmore, president of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association, storming up the driveway like she owned the place. Her lemon-yellow blouse was flapping in the wind like a warning flag, clipboard clutched under one arm, oversized sunglasses covering eyes that I knew were already judging me. "Mr. Samuel Zeller," she shouted, like she was calling roll call in a courtroom. "This is your final warning. That shed in your backyard is 3 inches taller than regulation." I killed the mower and yanked off my headphones. "What shed?" "The one you just built," she snapped, stabbing her pen toward the back of my property. "It's in violation of HOA Code 4.3b, I laughed. "Karren, that shed came with the property. Built in 2004, it's on the original blueprints." She stiffened. "Well, I wasn't president of the HOA in 2004. As of last month, I've implemented new visual conformity guidelines. You can't retroactively enforce rules that didn't exist when the structure was built. That's not how any of this works." Karren's lips twisted like she'd sucked on a lemon. "Then I'll escalate this to the compliance committee." "Do what you gotta do," I said, "but you're not stepping onto my property." That was when she crossed the invisible line, literally. She marched right past me, straight into my backyard. "Ma'am, I'm telling you right now, get off my property," I warned. "I'm the HOA president," she snapped. "I have oversight authority." "No, you don't," I said, pulling out my phone. "You're trespassing." She whipped around and pulled out her own phone. "Fine, I'll call the authorities. Let them deal with this." I rolled my eyes and walked back toward the garage. That's when she made the dumbest move of the day. She dialed 911. "Hello, yes," I heard her say. "There's a man here preventing me from doing my duties as HOA president. I demand immediate police intervention. He's being aggressive and won't allow me entry." That's when my wife, Nadia, Hensley, still in uniform from her shift, stepped out the side door, holding our toddler, Maddie, on her hip. Nadia had been an FBI dispatcher for over a decade. She knew the system better than anyone. "Karren," Nadia said coolly, "you just made a false emergency call to 911. That's a federal offense." Karren's face paled. Nadia held up her badge. "I'm a federal dispatcher. I heard everything. You lied to law enforcement and misused emergency services." Karren's voice faltered. I thought it was protocol. You thought wrong," Nadia snapped. "You're trespassing and you just committed a crime." I stepped up beside my wife. "Hope your clipboard has room for felony charges." A dusty patrol car rolled up 10 minutes later, engine idling low as 2 officers stepped out. Officer Langston, a tall man with a square jaw and sleeves rolled up to his elbows, scanned the yard with a practiced gaze. His partner, Officer Ruiz, followed with a clipboard already in hand. They weren't in a rush, but they weren't here to waste time either. Karren straightened her spine, lips pursed like she expected a medal. "Officer, thank goodness. I need this man fined and possibly removed from the premises. He's obstructing HOA compliance measures." Langston didn't look at her. "Dispatch said this was a trespassing complaint." "Who called it in?" "I did," Karren said, stepping forward. "I'm the HOA president." "I have the right to." "You called 911, Nadia cut in, voice level, "and lied about the nature of the emergency." Langston's brow twitched. "Ma'am, is that true?" Karren hesitated. "Well, I wouldn't call it lying. I was being denied access to inspect a violation." "That's not an emergency," Ruiz said, flipping a page. "And unless you've got a court order, you don't have authority to enter private property. This is not a communal zone." "I have jurisdiction under the HOA bylaws." Langston finally turned to her. "Bureaucratic rules aren't law. You need to leave this property or you'll be cited for trespassing." Karren's expression cracked for the first time. "You can't be serious." "I was doing my job." Nadia stepped forward, still holding Maddie. "We've got security footage of her walking past the property boundary and refusing to leave after being told twice. Plus, she made a knowingly false emergency call. That's a misuse of public resources." Langston turned back to Ruiz. "We'll need to file a report." He looked at Karren. "You'll be receiving a citation for trespassing." As for the 911 call, we're forwarding that to the city attorney's office. Karren opened her mouth, but Langston raised a hand. No more talking. You've made this worse for yourself. As the officers wrapped things up, I walked over to the garage, unlocked the side door, and returned with a manila folder. Thought you might want this, I said, handing it to Ruiz. Blueprints from the city's permit office. The shed was approved 20 years ago. It's grandfathered in. Ruiz nodded, flipping through the pages. Perfect. That'll help close this out. Karren didn't say another word. She marched off the property, heels stabbing the ground with every step like she was trying to impale the earth itself. Her SUV peeled out of the cul-de-sac a minute later, leaving behind a faint rubber trail of ego and frustration. Langston gave me a nod. Do yourself a favor, install a no trespassing sign if you haven't already. Makes things cleaner next time. I pointed to the sign nailed to the gate. He grinned. Even better, you're covered. After they left, Nadia handed Maddie off to me and disappeared into the house. 5 minutes later, she returned with her laptop and dropped it on the patio table. She's not going to stop, she said, typing rapidly. I've seen this kind of behavior spiral. Power tripping HOA heads love using vague language in their own rules to bully people. But I'm betting the Oak Ridge bylaws have holes big enough to drive a truck through. Think we can do something about it? I asked, bouncing Maddie on my hip. Oh, we're not just going to push back, she said. We're going to audit that entire board. That night after Maddie was asleep, we set up shop at the dining table. Nadia had pulled up Oak Ridge HOA's public filings, scanned meeting minutes, board structure, and financial statements. I handled the old homeowners Facebook group, messaging neighbors we knew had past run-ins with Karren's reign. By midnight, we had 3 folders, one for overreach, one for financial inconsistencies, and one for procedural violations. Turns out, Karren had unilaterally restructured the compliance committee last quarter, removing 2 elected members and replacing them with her personal acquaintances. No vote, no notice. She's not just overstepping, Nadia muttered, highlighting an expense report. She's laundering influence. I leaned over. What's that? See this? HOA dues paid for beautification services, but the vendor listed is her cousin's landscaping business. It's not even licensed in the state. That was enough to take it to the county compliance office. But Nadia wanted a deeper cut. The HOA is a nonprofit under state law. If she's using it for personal gain, that's a tax issue. If she's misrepresenting board authority, that's a governance violation. And if she's intimidating residents into compliance, that's coercion. I stared at my wife for a moment, struck by how easily she'd shifted from calm mother to legal tactician. You sure you don't want to run for the board? She didn't look up. I don't want to run. I want to dismantle it and rebuild it properly. By the end of the week, we had a full paper trail. 6 residents came forward with written statements about being fined for infractions that didn't exist, like unacceptable front yard harmony or non-regulation garden gnome count. One man had even been threatened with lien action over a mailbox color. We submitted the whole packet to the County Oversight Board and CC'd a local attorney who specialized in HOA abuse cases. Nadia insisted we include a copy to the state's Office of Consumer Protection just to be thorough. It wasn't about revenge. It was about stopping the rot before it spread further. A week later, an unmarked vehicle pulled into Karren's driveway. A man in plain clothes stepped out and knocked on her door with a thick folder in one hand. We watched from our porch as he identified himself and handed her the documents. She didn't argue, just stood there, frozen, as he walked away. The next HOA meeting was packed. Nadia and I sat in the second row, flanked by neighbors we'd barely spoken to before all this started. Word had spread. People were tired of being pushed around. Karren stepped up to the podium, visibly shaken. There have been concerns raised about the board's procedures. Effective immediately, I'm placing myself on administrative leave while the county conducts its review. No one clapped, no one said a word, until Mr. Patel, who lived 2 houses down, stood up and said, We'd like a full audit and a vote to dissolve the current board." That's when the room came alive, motions were made, nominations shouted. People who had been silent for years were suddenly full of fire. The vice president tried to gavel the meeting into order, but it was too late. The momentum had shifted. We didn't just win. We changed everything. By the third week, the neighborhood had shifted from quiet tolerance to active unrest. Yard signs began popping up overnight. "Transparency now. Our dues, our voice," and my personal favorite, nailed to the Johnsons' fence in fluorescent orange, "Karren stop won't stop." The energy had changed. People weren't just angry anymore, they were organized. Nadia had compiled a full dossier for the county audit team, but what we didn't expect was the call that came in just before dinner on a Thursday. She answered on speaker as she stirred sauce at the stove. "This is Special Agent Monroe with the IRS Criminal Investigations Division," the voice said. "We'd like to speak with you regarding the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association and any financial irregularities that may have come to your attention." Nadia wiped her hands on a towel and leaned closer. "You're calling about the landscaping contracts, among other things," he replied. "We've received a whistleblower file through a partnered enforcement channel. Your name was listed as the point of contact." She locked eyes with me. "We've got everything documented. You're welcome to it." Monroe's tone never changed. "We'll be in town tomorrow. Would you be available for an in-person conversation?" The next morning, 2 black sedans parked discreetly on the opposite side of the cul-de-sac. Monroe and another agent named Delaney, a forensic accountant with a no-nonsense demeanor, sat at our dining table reviewing the files we'd assembled. Bank statements from the HOA's public ledger, vendor payouts that didn't match state business records, and a spreadsheet of residents who'd been fined under what we now suspected were completely fabricated violations. Delaney adjusted her glasses. "This payout here for $22,000 landscaping for the rec center was submitted under a vendor ID that belongs to a dog grooming service in Westfield." "That's her cousin's business," Nadia said. "They just changed the name on the invoice." Monroe nodded slowly. "And this check dated 2 days later was deposited into a personal account under the name Reginald Whitmore, her husband," I added. Delaney closed the folder. "That's wire fraud. And if dues were used for personal expenses, we're looking at misuse of nonprofit funds. That's federal." It escalated quickly after that. The IRS agents moved forward with a sealed subpoena filed through the district court. The HOA's accounts were frozen pending investigation. The Oak Ridge office, a small converted garage on the community center lot, was padlocked by the end of the week. No one answered the phone line anymore, but the real storm hit when Karren attempted damage control. She scheduled a community transparency forum at the local Lutheran church off Maple Drive. Nadia and I went, not because we expected honesty, but because we knew it would implode. The room was packed. Folding chairs filled every corner. Karren stood behind a collapsible table with 2 hastily printed banners fluttering behind her, "Community First" and "Restoring Trust." Her voice cracked slightly as she addressed the crowd. "There have been misunderstandings," she began. "Some routine financial procedures are being misinterpreted due to the complexities of HOA operations. I assure you, everything will be clarified in due time." "Is that why your cousin's business was paid as a landscaping contractor while your husband deposited the check?" asked Helen from Cedar Ridge, arms crossed. Karren faltered. "Those were transitional vendors, temporary." "I was unaware of the specifics." "Then why is your signature on every single check?" said Marcus, a retired postal inspector with a memory like a steel trap. Karren pulled a paper from her folder. "I have a prepared statement. I'm formally requesting that all questions be submitted in writing and that this meeting be adjourned until a certified mediator is present." "Too late for that," said a voice from the back. The room turned. Monroe and Delaney stood at the rear entrance, dressed in plain clothes, badges clipped to their belts. "We're here under the authority of the United States Department of the Treasury," Monroe announced. "Miss Whitmore, we have a warrant for the seizure of all HOA banking and operational records." "Please step aside." Karren's face drained of color. "This is a private meeting. These people don't have jurisdiction." Delaney stepped forward. "The HOA is a registered nonprofit operating under federal tax code. Misuse of funds, falsified invoices, and unauthorized withdrawals fall under our purview." Nadia leaned over and whispered, "She's cooked." The agents moved to the front as Karren backed away from the table. Her attempt to retreat was cut short by Officer Langston, who entered from the side hallway with a county clerk. Langston had a different document in his hands. "This is a court order authorizing a temporary restraining directive against any further HOA actions until the audit is complete," he said. "Miss Whitmore, you are to relinquish all documents, keys, and electronic access immediately." "I'm being ambushed," she muttered, trying to collect her papers. "No, you're being held accountable," said Langston. "Take a seat." For the next 20 minutes, Delaney and Monroe collected hard drives, backup ledgers, and a stack of envelopes containing what appeared to be unmailed fines, dozens of them. The crowd watched in stunned silence. When they were done, Karren was escorted out of the building. No cuffs, not yet, but her exit was the quietest she'd ever made. 2 days later, the county appointed a temporary oversight committee made up of neutral administrators until the investigation concluded. The HOA website was taken down. All dues were suspended. Nadia and I didn't celebrate. Not yet. But we did take a walk through the neighborhood that evening. People waved. Some actually came out to shake our hands. A few dropped off thank you notes. One man left a homemade pie with "Justice" written in powdered sugar on top. The next week brought more revelations. Turns out Karren had been enforcing unratified rule changes, issuing fines through a third-party collections agency that didn't actually exist. The agency address led to a P.O. box registered under a shell company owned by her brother-in-law. That turned the case into criminal conspiracy. The state attorney general's office opened a formal investigation. Charges were inevitable, but what really changed everything was what happened the following month. The newly formed resident committee decided to hold a town vote not just to replace the board, but to decide whether Oak Ridge should dissolve the HOA entirely. Nadia and I sat in the back of the community center as the ballots were counted. One by one, tallied by hand. No one spoke until the final number was read aloud: 74 votes in favor, 12 opposed. The HOA was officially dissolved. There would still be neighborhood guidelines, but now they'd be managed by a volunteer council with no legal enforcement powers, just good faith agreements and open meetings. No more secret fines, no more backyard inspections, no more Karren. At the first council gathering, Nadia was asked to chair the ethics committee. She declined. "I'm not here to lead," she said. "Just to make sure no one else abuses the position." I planted a new row of sunflowers that spring, right next to the no trespassing sign that no longer felt necessary but stayed up anyway. Just in case, the shed stayed exactly where it was. 3 inches over regulation and completely untouchable. 3 months after the HOA was dissolved, Oak Ridge felt like a different neighborhood. The streets were quieter. Not because people weren't talking, they were, but because no one was lurking with a clipboard trying to catch someone leaving their trash bins out an hour too long. Yards started to look more colorful. Kids chalked on sidewalks without someone hollering about visual clutter. People were finally breathing. Nadia and I had returned to our routines. She was back to her dispatch shifts, and I was working from home, occasionally flipping through the local paper to track the slow unraveling of Karren Whitmore's empire. The last we heard, she'd been served a summons to appear before a federal grand jury. We figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. Late one Friday night, Nadia's phone buzzed while we were watching a movie. She glanced at the screen, then sat upright. "That's weird," she said, tapping through an encrypted message app. This is from Monroe. I pause the movie. IRS guy, he says I need to call him. Now. She stepped into the kitchen while I kept Maddie asleep on my chest. A minute later she returned, her tone sharp and clipped. Sam, you need to see this. She turned her laptop toward me, the screen already open to a series of scanned documents Monroe had sent. Nadia clicked through them, each file revealing something worse than the last. Karren hadn't just been misusing funds. She'd been forging signatures from deceased board members to authorize transfers. At least 3 checks were signed months after the listed signees had passed, one of whom had died in another state. The forgery was bad, done with a trembling hand and the same blue pen on every form, and it got darker. One of the old board members, a man named Clifford Rains, had died under what had originally been reported as accidental carbon monoxide poisoning. But Monroe's final report noted that the house had no gas appliances and no generator. His death had quietly been marked closed due to natural causes, but a forensic review had been reopened due to irregularities discovered during the HOA investigation. Nadia scrolled to the last file, a photo of a storage unit tied to a holding company owned by Karren's husband. Inside were boxes of HOA records, shredded documents, and a single briefcase containing over $70,000 in cash. Tucked inside the lid was a note, for emergencies. They think she was planning to flee, Nadia said. They found a burner phone, prepaid SIM cards, and a fake passport with her photo under the name Cynthia Hargrove. My jaw tightened. She was going to run. Not anymore, Nadia said. She's been detained. They're charging her with wire fraud, tax evasion, falsification of public documents, and obstruction of justice. But the Rains case, that's going federal. We didn't hear from Karren again directly, but 2 weeks later, a subpoena arrived in the mail. Nadia had been formally requested to testify at the federal hearing as a key witness in the case against her. The hearing was held in a sleek glass courthouse downtown. We didn't tell many neighbors we were going, just a couple of the people who had been most affected. Marcus, the retired postal inspector, came with us. So did Helen, who'd been fined for her non-compliant rose trellis. They sat behind us in the gallery, quiet but present. Karren entered the courtroom in a charcoal blazer, her hair shorter, her face pale. She didn't glance our way. Her attorney, a wiry man with a stack of color-coded folders, tried to argue that she'd been overwhelmed, that the board had been understaffed, and that she'd made poor decisions under pressure. The prosecutor didn't even flinch. He laid out the forged signatures, the false contractor payments, the shell company payouts, the cash in the storage unit, and the fake passport. Then he brought up the Rains investigation, not as a murder charge, not yet, but to establish a pattern of deception and concealment. Nadia was called to the stand halfway through the proceedings. She answered each question clearly, without emotion. She described the 911 call, Karren's trespassing, and the unraveling of the HOA's financials. When the prosecutor asked if she believed the behavior was part of a coordinated scheme, Nadia didn't hesitate. Yes, she knew exactly what she was doing. Karren didn't look up once during the testimony. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found her guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after 10. Her husband was also charged as a co-conspirator and received a separate sentence. There was no cheering in the courtroom, no applause, just a collective breath of relief. We walked out into the sunlight, blinking against the brightness. Marcus pulled a pair of sunglasses from his shirt pocket and nodded toward Nadia. "You gave this neighborhood its spine back," she shook her head. "We all did." The months that followed were calm. The neighborhood continued under its new structure, volunteer-based, open meetings, every budget line posted online. The old HOA office was converted into a community library, stocked with donated books and run by a retired librarian who'd lived on the block since the 80s. One afternoon, I found a folded note taped to our front door. It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was neat, and the paper smelled faintly of lavender soap. Thank you for not letting fear win. We planted a second row of sunflowers that fall not because we needed more, but because Maddie liked the way the bees danced between them. The shed out back got a fresh coat of paint, deep green, just the way I'd always wanted it. And every so often, as the sun dipped low and the lights flicked on down the street one by one, Nadia and I would sit on the porch with mugs of tea and watch the neighborhood we fought for simply live. No clipboards, no fines, no fear, just home.